Today's episode is brought to you by our company, NanoChomp Marketing Strategy and Analytics. We help product and marketing teams solve problems and experience growth using data and approachable AI. Visit nanochomp.com to learn more.
Hey everyone, on this episode of Soundbites, we have Sonjoy Ganguly, and he is the Chief Product Officer of Digitalzone. Digitalzone, it's a global marketing and demand gen company, and they have full service capabilities from lead gen to landing page creation to driving your audience through a curated path that gets them to convert. So I thought this was a really cool conversation with Sonjoy. He talks about his past in product management and what that means versus what people think it means and how that's evolved over time. He's talked about Digitalzone and the struggles and challenges that marketers face with demand gen programs. And he also hits on some really interesting B2B trends from a recent report that they just launched. So I think there's a lot for everyone in here. Oh, and he also talks about some AI power demand gen trends. So a lot for everyone to get something from.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting how he talked about product management, really near and dear to my heart, and then the utilization of AI for demand generation with marketers. He mentions a stat that we'll pull up right here, and it was only 50% of marketers are using a true omni-channel strategy, which seems hilariously low to me, but it's fascinating, and he digs into it a little bit more.
And he talks about why maybe that number is so low. So enjoy the episode.
Hey everyone, today on Soundbites we have a really special guest, Sonjoy Ganguly. He's Chief Product Officer of Digitalzone. Sonjoy has a really interesting background and journey from leading product teams, leading businesses, leading strategy at large consulting firms. He's got a proven track record of delivering results for product and marketing teams. He carries all that over to his CPO role at Digitalzone, and we're really excited to have him on today. Sonjoy, thanks for joining.
Thanks a lot, Derek.
So let's start with the backstory, the superhero origin story. What got you down the path that you're on right now? What kicked it all off for you?
Product management. As a chief product officer, product management is not what it was 30 years ago, right? So when I came into this part of my career 30 years ago, nobody knew what product management was, and it was it was a very nascent, discipline. And I always joke around. My wife and both my brother-in-laws are in the medical industry, and when we were getting married, they were asking what I do. They tell all their friends, "Oh yeah, our brother-in-law, he's in IT." And I try to explain to them, I'm not, right? They're like, "Hey, when I need a new laptop, who do I call?" I go, I just look up what the latest Dell is and make that recommendation to you guys. But the reality was 30 years ago, it was just a job out of college, and I was just working for a small startup. And, I was playing that role of that liaison between our clients and our engineering organization.
Mm.
And I was trying to figure out what we should build and how we should build it. And, and operationally, how do you create, this is all pre-internet, right? So this is like
Sure.
actual software that you shipped on CDs, or actually back in those software on disks, and, and you had to send documentation, and how do we operationalize that whole process? So I was doing all of that for a small startup organization. And, what happened was, I left that organization and I went to a company called Mediaocean, and they were looking for an actual product manager. And back in those days, it was very tactical, right? I was doing requirements gathering, testing, QA, documentation, training, all the really tactical operational side of product management. And this was a company that back in those days it was called Donovan Data Systems, and this was a company that really grew up where the original mainframe systems were developed by Michael Donovan, the CEO, and and it was an engineering led organization, and we helped the organization understand that there's some problems and challenges that we're facing as the company grows, and we're moving into desktop technologies, and we're moving into client server technologies, and eventually web technologies. That the old model of engineering led development was creating challenges. We didn't have structured processes or a product management lifecycle, as it were. They didn't know what a product management lifecycle was, so we helped them understand what a PMLC looked like, and how to implement one, and we moved product management to become this more kind of partnership role within engineering, and that's kind of what kicked off my role, and really led off my career over the years, going to companies like whether it's Mediaocean or DoubleClick or Zaxxas at WPP, or even Deloitte, really building product or managing product organizations that really more focus on strategy. And I think The biggest thing that I talk about is, now where I focus now is rather than the tactical side, it's now to be an innovator, right? An agent of change. Like
Mhm.
companies don't hire me because everything's going great. Companies hire me because they want to figure out what's next, what's
Yeah.
different. They bring me in and say, like, how do we bring change and innovation to our industry and to our organization? And one of the biggest learnings for me in my career is it's not about the work or the projects or the efforts that you take on. It's about the output. What is the
Mhm.
impact you have to your customers and the impact you have to the organization? That's what you need to talk about. And that's kind of where I've kind of really focused my career over the last 15 years.
No, that's amazing. And I think, Lauren and I have similar background in that we've come from the product space, from the product marketing space, from
Mhm.
product management. And product management is potentially one of the most misunderstood roles inside of a large organization. Very few people can say that is the value maximizer of my business, right?
Yeah.
They'll be like, oh, they're a product or a project manager, and it's like, well, no, they're not, right? That person is determining the success and failure of your product or service, and it's a very, very important role. So through that path, you really early on, you were in product management. What what are the big misconceptions of product management teams inside of organizations, and how do you overcome those misconceptions to be able to drive that growth and change?
I think there are so many misconceptions as you talked about, right? One is A, we're not IT.
Yeah.
B, there's different kinds of product management functions. There's technical product management functions. There's product marketing functions. I tend not to like when they get bifurcated that way because I feel like if you own the product, you should also own why you're building it. You should own the
Mhm.
messaging. You should own the go to market aspect of it because that's the way, as a product manager, you're really going to ultimately own the success of the product, right? When you have different organizations or different departments that own those different pieces, that's when the blame game starts to happen and we start blaming each other. I think at the end of the day, the biggest misconception that I always talk about is that product does not own the roadmap, right? And this is now if you would have asked me this 25 years ago, I was the hothead young junior product manager that said, I own the roadmap, I tell you what we're going to build, etc. But I've learned over the years that doesn't work, right? And that's usually how a company fails and how an organization fails.
Mm,
Um, what I say now is product management doesn't own the front roadmap. We own the framework. We own the process, right?
okay.
The business owns the roadmap. So, a seat at that prioritizations table should include every business stakeholder that has a say in the strategy of the organization, whether it's on the revenue side, whether it's on the operation side, whether it's on the finance side. Um, you know, Everyone should have a say in what we're doing and why. So that at the end of the day, we're all marching towards the same goal, right? We're all in alignment. It's like we all agree that these are the right priorities because this is what's going to make us successful. Versus saying, well, we're not successful because we don't agree with what product built, right? And because they built the wrong things. And the old saying of product manager, why did we build that? Oh, because the CEO told me to, right?
Mhm.
That's exactly what our job is, to sit in the middle there and say, wait, hold on a second, why are we building this? Like, what is the problem we're solving? What's the value of that problem? And helping the business stakeholders then kind of codify that process to say, okay, that is the right priority because that is solving a big problem, and you know what? As the revenue guy, I can solve that.
Yeah.
Or as
I
the
think
operations guy, I can deliver on the success of that product. So like making sure that as an organization, we're all in lockstep that way. I think that's the biggest misconception in product management today.
I would say like Derek and I have probably worked for companies where PMs do own the roadmap, and then the why is because the CEO told me to. I mean, that's a very familiar story, and so it is good to hear that yes, like the business owns the roadmap, and there should be collaboration and stakeholders should have a say. How does that like? How did you experience that transition? Or I don't know if you were part of a company that did have a transition where it was like, oh, the PMs are really the owners of the roadmap, and then it went to more of a collaboration model. And or from your experience, how would you recommend teams sort of transition to something like that if they're in the CEO told me to kind of?
Look, I've been in all of those roles, right? So I've
Mhm.
been the one who, quote unquote, owned the roadmap. I've been the one that gave that answer. That's like, I did this because the CEO told me to do it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of learning over time, like what's working, what's not, and then you realize okay, I said the CEO did it, but wait, hold on a second. What's my job here, right? My job is to, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but to stop the CEO, right? I worked for a large and not large, but mid-sized 1,500 person global company in the media advertising industry. And we had this funny saying that when the CEO would come from meeting with our, large agency clients, he would literally go down the row of product managers and screw up everybody's roadmap because he's like, oh, I just came from this
Oh,
client and this is what we're going to do now. This is what we're going to do now. And we would try to say to him, like, wait, what about this? Oh, you'll figure that out. Right.
yeah.
And, so we actually had, at that point, I wasn't the head of product, but I was the head of my product team. So we actually had come up with this process where someone would go to the head of product to say, by the way, the CEO just came back from client and he's starting down the row of product managers. She would get his wife, call his secretary to get his wife on the phone to pull him out of that process and just say, oh, by the way, your wife's on the phone. You need to go talk to your wife, just to distract him from that. Um, but the reality is, I think it's just over time, right? Like I've been in roles and I've had to learn, you know what? It's my job to stop that process or stop that dysfunction. Or we've had failures because of those dysfunctions. And then it's also realized, you know what? I can say the CEO told me to do it, but it was my job to build the right product. So I've had some failures and I've had to learn and then figure out how to refactor. And as I went to new organizations, I would come in with this awakening. And I remember once in an interview, I was interviewing for a job, and one of the senior execs, she goes, "I've never heard a product manager say that they don't own the roadmap. That's actually refreshing to hear because like we're so used to product managers coming in and just telling us, we're going to tell you what we're going to build." And I was like, "That
Yeah.
we don't have a crystal ball, right? Like we can come up with ideas just like anybody else can. It's just what's the framework and process so that we all agree that those are the right priorities and why."
Yeah, and having like the engineering team or different members of the marketing team might have puzzle pieces you don't have. So if you try to take the consult and dictate approach, you end up missing a lot, and then the rest of the team doesn't even have ownership or buy-in of the deliverable, which hurts you too. So you come from a consulting background, and you mentioned really early on here about getting those right frameworks in place. What are your first frameworks that you think about when you start trying to change the culture from CEO has a trend of one feature that he wants to try to deploy, and you're trying to say, look, these are the processes, these are the frameworks we're going to put in early to make sure we deliver the best product for the highest value. What does that look like?
So, first of all, I do have to add, like, just like you pointed out, right? Like, so even with engineering, it's so critical that, like, when I build an engineering organization or I come in and join an engineering organization, it's like I don't want engineers for this exactly the same thing, like, to say, why did you build the product that way? Because that's what the product requirements said to do, right? I
Mm,
said, product's job is to define the product statement, the problem statement, and the why, the what and the why. But the how is a partnership between product and engineering. So I want engineers that are going to push back on product and say we shouldn't do it that way because that's not solving the problem. And in my opinion and in my experience, that's how we've gotten better products. But to your point, Derek, like in terms of when you're working with an organization that and it's a really tough change. Like when product doesn't exist, or you're trying to change that role of product, changing the mindset of the business stakeholders and the CEO is difficult, right? Because especially if it's a smaller company or it's a CEO that had that level of quote unquote control, or even the rest of the organization. I said we used to just go to engineering, tell them what we want, and they just did it for us, right? Like, I came from this. Even salespeople come back from a client and saying, hey, I can close this $2 million deal if you guys add this one feature in, and engineering says so, no problem. And now comes product that says, hold on a second, that $2 million one-off distracts us from our long-term
yeah.
strategy, that can ultimately have $20 million of value for the organization. And then they're like, oh, you guys are like screwing up my ability to hit my numbers on the short term. So it's a process of, one is you have to define the goals, right? And I think it starts there. Like, before we start anything, what I always do is with the management team to say, like, what's the product vision? Do we have the right company vision and mission statement? Do we have the right product vision that aligns to that? What are we trying to do? Or as I like to say, or what do I want to be when I grow up? Same thing. Like as a company, who do we want to be when we grow up? Who do we want the industry to see us as? And if we can answer that question, and then we can figure out our strategy and goals across that, And then, I always like to build things in horizons, right? So then define what's our, 12-month horizon, 24-month horizon, 36-month horizon. And, what do we focus on in those timeframes, and usually it's things like how do we focus on operational excellence? How do we focus on our unique value prop? And then how do we focus on innovation? If we look across all three of those and we define priorities across all those three areas, and how are we measuring the output, right? So
Mm.
when I go back to the CEO and I say, okay, you want us to do that, my job is to measure that value, right? So I sat with our CRO, we put a model together, and we said, like, if we build this is the value of doing that. And then the
Yeah,
CEO have to look at that and say, maybe that isn't the right thing for us to do.
yeah. The what does success look like question is always tough, right? When you're trying to get buy-in, it's like, okay, great, well, we can do that, but feature-led growth
Right.
typically ends up going wrong. You have these short-term nibbles. It's like that might only be valuable for one person in the use case.
Right.
So you've been working with Digitalzone now for a little bit. How are you taking this and applying it to Digitalzone, and how is that impacting Digitalzone's business?
So exactly what we just talked about. Like, I joined the company October of last year, and I came in, and before I went into what's our roadmap and this is what we're going to build, I first started thinking about what are the market challenges that exist today. Who are our customers? Where's our growth going to come from? Are this going to come from our existing customers, a different customer segment, and what problems are we trying to solve in the marketplace? And after defining that, right, and again, not me defining it alone, but working with the other business stakeholders to say, these are the problems we should solve, right? So at the end of the day, we're all in alignment to saying that that's right, that's who we want to be as a company, right? So I always say it's about the meetings before the meeting. So before we had our annual strat planning meeting, I'd already met with the CRO, I already met with the
Mhm.
CEO, I already met with our CFO, I already had those discussions so that we're all aligned. So that when we had the group meeting for strat planning, there's no one in the room that says, I don't agree with that vision, because we already met, we already debated it, we already talked about it, and we're already in alignment now. And now here's the plan on how we're going to execute against that vision.
Classic Japanese nimawashi, right? I think is the correct term for that.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about Digital Zone for folks who may not know what you do, and give us the high level elevator pitch.
So, Digitalzone is, one of the leaders in the B2B marketing industry. We are a demand gen company, and what we do is we specialize in defining and creating demand for B2B marketing companies. So generally, we've got a sweet spot in software technology, but we bring value to healthcare, to finance, other industries as well. But our key unique selling proposition is that we own both the data and the means of production. So in our industry, there are companies that leverage a lot of third-party data, so they don't own the data, or they don't own the means of production. They're actually, outsourcing the actual demand generation to other companies, and they're just being basically an aggregator and slash reseller of that service.
Mm.
But because we own the data, we own the means of production, it means that we're able to control quality, privacy and compliance, costs, and ultimately be able to deliver the best value at efficiency and at scale for our customers, making sure that they're getting the best demand that they can get, through our ecosystem.
So right now, there's a lot of changes, specifically as it relates to digital privacy. One of the big things that we've been talking about with our clients is uh, making sure we get first and second party data for their customer data platforms, because cookies are going away. Google's killing them, and we see like Apple and Google both will use privacy as the guise for protecting things, but really what they're doing is they're aggregating it, keeping it to themselves, and then selling it back, which is
Well,
kind of weird. How are you mitigating that, or how are you
they
walking through it?
sell their own networks and their own technologies, right? I mean, I came from DoubleClick, right? I was there when Google acquired DoubleClick, right? So they've got the best ad technology platform in the industry, and now they own the first party data that no one else can get to execute on it.
So with the killing off of the cookies, what are you guys doing, or what are marketers doing to aggregate around that or to work around that to make sure that they can still deliver a good experience?
So of course, everybody's thinking about identity resolution in one way or another. There are a variety of different initiatives. Obviously, there's all the companies like LiveRamp and Trade Desk, AppNext or Xander. Sorry, using older tech names, right? But everyone's coming out with their own identity resolution platforms. I would say 90% of them are hashed email based.
Mm.
Right. Of course, Google says that they're not going to support hashed email either because they believe that's just another form of identity. Because
For the
again, they just
non,
want.
for maybe non marketers, what does hashed emails
So a
mean?
hashed email is basically taking an individual's email address and basically applying "quote unquote" a hash or obfuscating or anonymizing the actual
Mm-hmm.
the identifying unique identifying part of that email address. So
Mm.
that like if I'm Sonjoy at digitalzone.com, the at digitalzone.com doesn't change, but the Sonjoy becomes this hash data value that any end user can't just decrypt and know identify me against it.
It's like digital pig Latin.
So you know what? That's a great concept. Um, but so, and that's what most companies are focusing on. We're working with we determined a long time ago is that uh, we're not going to try and become our own unique identity resolution provider at the ID level. But there's enough technologies out there that already are focusing on that. So we're partnering with a lot of these other companies. We're focused on identity resolution, so that we're not um, dependent on any one technology. If that one succeeds or doesn't succeed, we can integrate with multiple identity resolution providers to ensure our capabilities will continue in the new world. When these changes become more robust.
No, that makes sense. And I think when you're doing lead gen and lead demand, lead generation, you had mentioned you don't use aggregators. You're not collecting, putting the robot together Voltron style. You end to end own the process. You own the data. You own the end leads, and you even create the right landing pages for segmentation, right?
Absolutely.
So that gives you the opportunity to have the most personalized experiences. But as demand generation is focusing on hyper personalized experiences, what are you seeing as the role of AI in that?
So I've seen many evolutions or revolutions in our industry over the last 15 years. On the advertising side, of course, we went from traditional advertising to digital advertising to mobile to programmatic, etc. But on the B2B marketing side, we went from just kind of pray and spray models where we just went after kind of an ICP. Like we want companies of this size, and we want people of this demographic, and those are the kinds of demand gen we want to create. And then we went through the ABM revolution, right, where everyone's focused on account-based marketing, saying, look, it's not about just hitting a random group of people; it's about hitting
Mm-hmm.
the right companies, and it's aligning. ABM isn't just about the activation; it's about aligning your goals with sales, because sales has always been an ABM strategy. And the problem was that, and that's one of the things I learned really quickly when I started up my last company, was marketers were coming back saying, like, we're having trouble justifying our expense because sales is not giving us the attribution to the leads that we're generating. And we said, that's because you're focused on leads and sales is focused on accounts.
Mm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You're focused on individuals, so you need to find that alignment. So we went through the ABM revolution. We went through intent-based targeting. We went through multi-channel marketing. Like I remember talking to B2B marketers, and they were like, "Digital advertising? I'm a marketer. Why are you talking about digital advertising?" I'm KPI'd on leads, not on clicks, and
Mm-hmm.
helping them understand the value of multi-channel marketing in your lead generation, or ultimately, or in your pipeline generation needs, because ultimately your boss's boss is being KPI'd on revenue, not being KPI'd on lead. You as an individual are being KPI'd on lead, but your boss's boss or boss's boss's boss,
Mm-hmm.
the head of marketing is being KPI'd on revenue. So we've got to build a process that enables you to not only deliver on that, but be able to measure that. And that was kind of a lot of the evolution. I think, now AI is where ABM was 8 to 10 years ago, right? ABI is kind of this tool that everyone's testing, everyone's piloting, and everyone says there's something there, but we don't know what it is yet. And we don't know how it's going to fit into our ecosystem on a day-to-day basis and really become a streamlined part of our process. And that's where over the next few years, and AI is going to affect every aspect of the B2B marketing ecosystem, from audience identification to media planning, to media activation, to content generation, and even attribution and analytics. AI will impact all aspects of that.
Yeah, there's so much change and evolution happening, right? It's like we've talked a little bit about cookies and how Google's like kind of gating all their data. We talked about AI. Do you see that like unknown, or like this evolution, this continuing, evolution in like data gathering and how we leverage AI is like a barrier to marketers implementing demand gen strategies?
So, unfortunately, the way marketers operate, and I've seen this over especially the last 15 years or so, is they get sold on all these sexy tools,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's the big buzzword. But then at the end of the day, because they just go back to operating their legacy model,
Hmm.
right? Because it's just because their infrastructure is already set up to operate in that legacy model. And to leverage these tools means that they have to go and make a change organizationally to then adopt those new technologies.
Yeah.
And it's just they've got so much work to do, and there's so many priorities, and ultimately they're just focused on their revenue or their pipeline, that they're just like, activate my lead gen program and go on to the next vendor or the next campaign or the next project. And they don't have time to focus on, how do I make organizational change to then leverage these technologies? And that's where I feel our industry has been suffering.
Yeah, I think from a marketing perspective, as someone who's worked at a large corporation as a marketer, it's like, do the marketers have the ability to like have an impact on organizational change? Like, are they even empowered to do something like that? It's like, we would always, within the marketing team and sales team, we'd be like, this is great. But then you have IT, then you have like leadership who doesn't care. And so then you kind of hit a wall and you're like, never mind. I don't have time. I can't actually fight this battle, but I do have this new expensive tool and it could probably do a lot for me if everything was in place. And so how, as an industry, like, how do we work through this?
I mean, just to give you some examples, I had a client very recently say to me, like, we love the concept that you're presenting to us, but that involves other marketing disciplines, right? That
Yeah.
we don't have access to. And they're like, to be honest, I'm not willing to use my political capital to go fight that
Hmm.
fight, because although it's the right thing for the company, it's the right thing for the marketing org, for me as an individual and my KPIs, it doesn't help me right away.
Hmm.
So, you go for it, but it's not something I'm going to help you with. There's that aspect. I've had other aspects where there's something that the marketing lead, the head of marketing, the CMO says, yes, we're going to do this. And IT, to your point, says, yeah, it's on our list somewhere. We'll get to it. And
Hmm.
where the CMO is going to the CTO to saying, like, I don't understand. I've made this a priority, but you're not executing on it. Like, what's going on? And the CTO is pushing back to saying, yeah, we got these 15 other priorities ahead of that. And the marketing can't enact their priorities.
Yeah.
So it goes back to the same thing that we talked about, at the beginning of this conversation, right? Like the same thing that, like, what happens in an organization, the larger the organization is, the more common this is that every organization is operating against a different set of KPIs.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right? So, going back to one of the first things that I focus on, like before I go talking about roadmap and strategy or even vision, it's what are the organizational KPIs that we're focused on as a company. So that's something that I do for my companies, is I start to say, like, I work with the CEO to say, the CRO, the CFO, the CPO, like, we can't have different KPIs and different OKRs, because when that happens, then we're not working together. I literally just the other day had a conversation, like, there should be one number, and that
Yeah.
every department is focused on that number. And that's the only way we're going to be successful. And that's the problem that we face with these enterprise organizations, right? It's the IT departments and the marketing departments have different OKRs, and they're not working together.
And even like Lauren kind of implied it, but one of the other things, especially when you're deploying new technology like AI, there's a learning curve for the people that are using it in the marketing teams, for the people that have to manage the data security and protection like in the IT teams. And that learning curve, that educational barrier, creates the ability for people to continue doing what they always have done even if they change the name, we saw this when we look at deploying agile principles into organizations. You'll see a lot of people that will have read the Lean Startup. You'll have a lot, you've mentioned OKRs, a lot of people that will have read Measure What Matters, and they want to have objectives, key results. They want to do that. They want to implement Agile Scrum, and then they even start using the language and then retrofitting it into Waterfall, retrofitting it into their old process. So it's like, new Coke. It's rebranded, but it's not changed too much.
It's funny because this is at the heart of every company's challenge, right? And change, right? It's all about change, and how do you embrace change? And it's not an easy thing to do. I gave a talk at my company's annual kickoff at the beginning of this year, and I talked about like change is inherently difficult, and as human beings, we all fear change. But at the end of the day, and I don't know if Benjamin Franklin is the one who said this, but I think it's attributed to him. Change is the only constant in our life, and it's our ability to adapt to that change is what defines our success. Now, I don't know if he's the one who said that or not, but I do agree that it is attributed to him. But I completely agree with that. It's so critical to be able to drive that and embrace that change. But it's when someone like me comes in, it's difficult for some companies to say we're going to do things differently, and there are people who are going to say, "But I like the way I was doing it before," and it's the same thing for our clients, right? And the bigger the client, the harder it is for them to embrace change.
And I would say, like, hate to use a buzzword, but like with economic uncertainty, everyone's like I think people get more risk averse. It's like they just want to, and like maybe the person that you spoke with last week, they're like, hey, listen, I'm not going to use my political capital because this may hurt me to make this change. But at the end of the day, like, especially when things are, maybe more uncertain, you have to do things to stand out. You have to do things differently because that could be what saves you, especially when times are challenging. But it is hard to see that in the moment. Just wondering if you're seeing anything like that with the folks that you're talking to.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I think this goes back to a larger problem, right? Where we think about like quarterly results, right? Like, and if you think about just how the stock market is structured, and everybody's focused on quarterly earnings and quarterly results, it makes it very difficult for people to focus on the big picture and long-term strategy. They're just focused on short-term wins and short-term goals.
Yeah.
But going back to also what you guys talked about earlier, when we talk about AI, it's also exactly where cloud technologies were 15, 20 years ago, where enterprise companies were like, we're not touching that, right? Because there's too many security risks, too many issues with indemnity. We're not comfortable with putting our data in the cloud. Not going to happen. And almost every enterprise company that I talked to was like, absolutely not. We're staying on-prem. We're never going to go in the cloud.
Sure.
Yep. Now, of course, that's changed, right? Now they're realizing it's the only way to scale, only way to grow. And that's where AI is now, right? These big enterprise companies like, oh, wait, you're building something with AI. You know what? There's too many security concerns. There's privacy concerns. I don't really know what the AI is doing. So unless you build in all these rules that enable me to turn AI off or control the level of AI, my organization is not going to support it.
Yeah. And I think one thing that we run into quite a bit is because of the success recently of ChatGPT and these large language models, when normal people hear AI now, my mom hears the term AI, they're thinking ChatGPT, they're thinking large language models, they're thinking they open Snapchat and it's the first contact they have there. What they're not thinking of is machine learning, data science, statistical analysis. And you touched on that earlier. When you're putting AI through a whole business, it's what data do we have? How do we analyze it? How do we do the descriptive, predictive, and just diagnostic, descriptive, predictive analytics on it, which is outside of the realm of LLMs, right? Like LLMs is a subset of that. So when you're looking at the future of demand generation, how are you leveraging these data tools to get the most results? What does that future state look like for you?
So I think to your point, right? Exactly right. And that's where we've been focused as an organization, like in terms of it's not looking at AI as the generic buzzword, but what is AI, right? AI, as you said, like, yes, there's the large language models, there's data science, there's machine learning. Let's bring in the right practices to focus on the right problems, right?
Mm.
So where we're focused, it's just saying like, okay, what are the problems in this market that exists today that the B2B marketers have? And how can we apply the right data sets? How do we expand those data sets? Um, and then how do we apply the right intelligence to those data sets to be able to address solve those problems? And that's what we're focused on, right? That's what we're trying to solve. I can't get into too many details, but exactly what we're
Sure.
trying to build until we come to market with these solutions. But that's exactly what we're trying to focus on. Like, we're not trying to your point, Derek, like, it's, our mothers and grandmothers and everything, when they hear AI, they think like the Terminator, right? They think like the robots are taking over. And of course, in a grander scheme, and you talk to the Elon Musks and all these other people, that's what they're worried about.
Sure.
But we're talking about data and being able to analyze data and predict patterns based on data, and then action on that data in a real-time manner.
Speaking of trends like ChatGPT, what sort of B2B trends are you seeing? I think you guys did some research recently.
We've done a lot of great research. Some of our most recent research findings really talks about what is the B2B marketer concerned with right now, right? And I think one of the biggest pain points is around the rise of the millennial buyer,
Hmm.
right? That, it's the legacy content syndication has a limited lifespan because the millennial buyer, TLDR, right? They don't consume long form content.
Sorry.
Yeah. Notice I had to say they, not
Yeah.
we. Uh, and so change is necessary to be able to maintain uh, the current pipelines for the new audiences, right? Because
Hmm.
millennial buyers consume content differently. I
Yeah.
think the next thing is the B2B marketing ecosystem has just gotten too complex. Marketers are looking to simplify, right?
Yeah.
Especially when budgets become tightened, they can't work across multiple providers. They can't work across multiple technologies. It has to be made easier for them. Um, and I think, at the end of the day, it's about data quality. It's about leveraging data, leveraging a multi-channel approach. Again, as I said, 10 years ago, marketers were so hesitant to apply multi-channel approaches. Now, at least 50% of marketers recognize, or I think it was 40% of marketers recognize that, connecting brand and demand does have a significant impact on the success of their B2B marketing campaigns. Leveraging data, that, 39% marketers said that there's a lack of buyer journey insights that they need
Hmm.
to help influence their customer journeys. We talk the vendors, the data quality, all of these areas are focused on what the research has indicated where the marketer challenges that live today.
Yeah, that's a scary low number for the number of people that are on board with omni-channel or multi-channel strategies. And to your point, besides what we'd call like a spray and pray approach to multi-channel, what y'all are working on and what I think the industry leaders are really going to be focusing on are how do I take an individual's journey from email to social media to SMS, connect them seamlessly in a personalized way that isn't hello name and then generic stuff afterwards, right? I
Right.
think there are a handful of people that are doing a really great job, but I think most people are just not there. Like it's complicated. It takes time.
Hmm.
The tools are emerging, but it's fascinating to watch.
And people are afraid to give up the control.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think there's a book
I,
called Loon Shots that I reference too frequently, and it talks about the use case that you mentioned before. It's like, well, this might be the good thing for the organization, but there's a lot of inertia here. And is this better for my career to die on this hill or make friends with these people and get promoted to VP later? And it talks about how innovation can die in those big organizations, and then how do you mitigate that, which is another story for another day.
that's why
But
most organizations aren't innovative.
Yeah.
You
Right.
know,
They
and
used Nokia as a good example, and I think most of us will think of Nokia as a phone company that, had some rise and fall and indestructible phone with Snake on it, but they were a rubber boots company. Like that's where they were a rubber goods company for farmers, and then they made walkie-talkies for farmers. They were so focused on delivering value for that specific segment that they got their way into cell phones. Like that's where
I mean,
innovation is.
they
Then
were
they
innovative until they got acquired.
Yeah, and then they stopped. They froze because they were using good management tactics to preserve the cash cow until it no longer started producing milk, right?
But
So
I think you know, like you have to take a few companies out of the ecosystem, like take the Apples of the world, and even Apple, right? Like Apple, for yes, was an innovative company, but where's Apple's innovation been in the last decade,
Right.
yeah,
right? They're still a hugely successful business, right? And no one can debate that. But past the iPhone and the Apple Watch, wearables, maybe that's about it. The innovation's kind of slowed down now, and they're due for something, and I don't think they even know what that is, what that's going to be. They're just kind of they're doing incremental enhancements and not step change.
and it's probably not going to be their $3,800 ski goggles. Like I'll probably end up eating those words in a couple of years. I'll look back at this, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be the space where they really thrive.
I was having dinner with my neighbor last weekend, and he was talking about he took his son to the Apple store and they did the demo. He's like, yeah, but you don't hear anybody talking about the Apple headset anymore. It's like because there's no use case for it yet.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and you can buy a car for that price, which is it's a tough value prop.
Well,
So
innovation, needs a use case too.
yeah,
Yes. Can't just innovate for innovation's sake.
That being said, some innovation or discovery sometimes has no roadmap, right? So we
Mm.
might, to your point, like we might have no idea what that use case is today, and 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it could be the leading use case in some industry, right?
Right.
sure.
It's the same thing. Remember, Google had the Google Glass 5 years ago that was a complete flop.
Yeah.
When we look back at that, so before we started our own business, we worked in a company that did some manufactured goods, and we thought through, man, if you had that tool at the price point it had and you gave it to the operators so that it would highlight with like a blue or green dot where a fastener had to go every single time, like for augmented reality, that is a killer use case. Reading your email weirdly on an airplane with goofy
I'd rather
glasses
not.
on, not the use case. But I think yeah, to your point, being able to take those, recognize different opportunities and those obstacles could be really interesting. So, Sanjoy, let's talk through if you had the chance to have dinner with yourself at 18, 25 years old, you get to sit down with that version of you. What does that conversation look like? What advice do you give that person?
That's a really tough one. I think it comes down to confidence.
Hmm.
So, and I think there's two aspects of that. On the personal level, the 18, 25-year-old, like if I had the confidence then that I have now, I'd probably be a lot more successful in the bar scene, when I was trying to meet girls at bars, etc. Um, maybe I wouldn't, who knows? But the same applies to companies and professionally, right? I think there are great leaders and there are terrible leaders out there, right? And I've had the opportunity to work for both. And, in my opinion, the kind of really bad leaders are the ones that focus on feeding off of others' confidence and stripping their
Hmm.
confidence, right? And that's
Mm.
that's how they manage. They manage by pushing people down, right?
Yeah.
And if I was talking to myself 18 to 20, at that stage of my career, it would be to teach myself how to manage that experience, right? And how to stay strong and understand, I might be young or I might not have all the answers, but, be a better advocate for what I do know and stand up to those kinds of, you know, toxic leaders.
Yeah, I think
Great
that's
answer.
really great advice, and I think Lauren and I talk about this with each other quite a bit. I think the stigma or the perceived danger of failure is way higher in imagination than in reality. And it makes people afraid to try things, test things, because they think the consequences are so significant. When in reality, they're really not. They're not as bad as you think. I mean, there are exceptions to that. If you try to jump off a building, those might be extreme consequences. That might be an extreme mistake. But
Well, you have to measure it.
yeah,
I had a boss early
Corporate
in my
mistakes.
career. I had a boss early in my career, and I said to him, I think something went wrong in a project. And I went to his office, hat in hand, and said, "Look, I got to apologize. We made a big mistake." And he goes to me, he goes, "Listen, if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying."
Yeah.
yeah,
Right. And that was probably one of the best things that he taught me early in my career. Along with the other factors, he said, like, when I didn't get a promotion that I wanted, and he goes, "Did I know you wanted that promotion?" I said, "No." He goes, "Your career is as much your own responsibility as it is mine. Like, you can't walk into your annual review to say, 'Where's my promotion?' that we didn't even know you were interested in." Right. Like,
that's really
Yes.
good
this is an
advice.
ongoing conversation. So that was, some great advice I got early in my career that, you got to manage expectations up and down.
Yeah, and you have to be your own advocate. And luckily, I'm sure all of us have had bosses that have been great advocates for us. But to your point, like they don't know what you don't tell them, and so you
Right.
do have to sort of advocate for yourself, and you can't expect your bosses to do all of that for you. Last question that we've liked to ask recently is like, what's the last thing you've changed your mind about? Can be personally or professionally.
That's also a really good one. Give me one quick second while I think that one through. But I think for me, it's all about. I'm not going to get into specifics again, but it's about being open to new ideas.
Mm.
And my apologies there. Um, and ultimately, sometimes those new ideas will be backed by data.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Sometimes that data will be subjective. Um, But the point is that you can't be so rigid that you don't listen to all the sides, right?
Yeah.
And and you have, again, as we talked about, like even on the roadmap, like you have to have a process to understand why you pick the idea that you picked, right, or the option that you picked. And as long as you can understand that and define why you picked that option, it helps to set up yourself for success. Because you know going in with a rigid idea and saying it's my way and that's the only way we're going to do it, which is human nature, right? That's how we all think, and we all think we all think we're armed with the right data or the right ideas, but we have to listen, right? And I think the most effective leaders are the better listeners than they are the better speakers.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice and a really great stopping point too, because that's really the ultimate thing. I think there's always a saying, you have two ears and one mouth, but you have to make that transition as a leader when you're the person that has all the answers to the person that's collecting all the information so you can work together to create a good decision, right? I think the mistake that a lot of smart people make is they always have to be the one delivering the answer or solution versus the one synthesizing the data that could potentially change their mind, right? And so we've been thinking about that a lot. Like, what do we change our minds about? And if the answer is not a lot, maybe you're not taking in enough information to be able to reevaluate what you thought about something. So it's
Now,
been an
th-
interesting question
there's
you've been
some
asking.
there are some leaders, like you look at like the Steve Jobs of the world, right? They were terrible listeners,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
right? The problem is the leaders that try to mimic other leaders,
yeah,
right? When they come in and say, like, I'm going to be the next Steve Jobs, I know exactly. And that's usually like Steve Jobs broke every rule of business,
Yeah.
right? And yet was one of the most successful leaders, like in our generation or in many generations. Um, but that same model is not going to work for most leaders.
exactly right. Well, Sanjoy, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a really great conversation. Good insights. Loved hearing about what you're doing at Digital Zone. Loved hearing about your philosophy about product management, space that's close to our hearts, and listen or hearing what your takes are on lead generation and the progression of marketing using AI. Really great conversation. Thank you so much for joining today.
Well, Lauren, Derek, I really appreciate the time. It was great to connect with you guys.
Thank you so much.